Remember when Nicolas Cage was the biggest star in the world? Let's go back.
Tamagotchi, the of Y2K.
Nicolas Kim Coppola. The man, the myth, the legend. Or as we know him better, Nicolas Cage. I decided to sit down and watch 12 Nicolas Cage films in 1 week. You may be wondering why. You may think I'm crazy, but I did it for one reason. To answer the question, is Nicolas Cage a good actor? Growing up, there were certain actors who I missed out on. I grew up on Jim Carrey and Robin Williams films. Nicolas Cage was someone I knew about but didn't watch. Up until I did this Cage-a-thon, if you will, I had only seen 2 of his films, Kick-Ass and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. However, he wasn't the main draw for each of those films. Nicolas Cage is one of the biggest stars in Hollywood throughout the 1990s. He went from a serious actor, to an action star, to a video-on-demand star, to a meme. All I've seen are jokes about Nicolas Cage's over-the-top acting, and all I see are the isolated clips of him in movies where he's doing just that. But he's been around forever, and there's something to say about that kind of staying power. Now we're in a bit of a Nicolas Cage renaissance, starting with Mandy, then his film Pig, and now his new film, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. I wanted to judge for myself. So is Nicolas Cage a good actor? Join me as I go through 12 of his most famous films as I try to answer that question. First up is Con Air. Con Air is the Nicolas Cage film I've probably heard brought up the most throughout my life. I didn't know a lot going into it, and I think that always makes for a better viewing experience. Most of the time, trailers can ruin movies. The film stars, you guessed it, Nicolas Cage. I'll run through the plot quick and try not to give too many spoilers, but I mean, it came out in 1997, so... Cage plays a military man coming back from a tour of duty to see his pregnant waitress wife, who is apparently only 2 days pregnant, which makes you question, is it actually his kid? I mean, if he was just off at war. Also, they somehow already know it's going to be a girl. Anyway, some guys at the bar don't like Nicolas Cage, seemingly just because he's in the military. They jump him in the parking lot and Cage kills one of the guys in self-defense, and that somehow means he gets 7 years in prison. He must have had Amber Heard's lawyer. Fast forward 7 years and Cage is getting out of prison and shows off his incredible accent.
Dear Hummingbird, break out the fine china, chill the lemonade, tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree, 'cause this boy's coming home to his ladies, coming home forever.
He hitches a ride on a plane carrying the most dangerous criminals in America to a new facility, and what a cast of criminals it is. You've got John Malkovich as Cyrus the Virus, who is basically the highly intelligent psychopathic ringleader. Ving Rhames as Diamond Dog, forget what he did. Dave Chappelle as Pinball, who's a high-profile junkie, I think. Danny Trejo as Johnny 23, the rapist. And serial killer Garland Green, played by Steve Buscemi. It truly is a plane full of some of the craziest character actors around, and I love it. But, surprise, surprise, the criminals escape and take over the plane, and John Cusack is the agent on the ground, and he's like, "Get my plane back!" Cage's friend Baby-O is also on the plane, and he's a diabetic and needs his insulin. So Cage decides he's going to be a hero of the day. By the way, it's established that Baby-O has diabetes, yet they make a point of saying they became friends in prison because Cage would slip him snowballs. But, plot be damned. Also, I had to look it up, but this is indeed the same actor who played Bubba in Forrest Gump, and he shares an almost identical scene with Nicolas Cage. This movie is full of insane one-liners, and I feel that could be a reoccurring trend with this Nick Cage film marathon I'm doing. So I'm going to pick my favorite Cage quote from every film I watch. This was my favorite line from this film.
Cyrus, this is your barbecue, man, and it tastes good.
I want to point out this scene here as well. Cage gets shot and doesn't even react. He's either superhuman or on a lot of coke. There also seems to be a trend in 90s action films where the hero does more damage than the villains ever planned on doing. Cage's character is essentially saving 5 people. These 3 hostages, this guard, and his friend Baby-O. He successfully does this but lands the plane on the busy Vegas Strip, causing so much chaos and destruction you'd think Michael Bay directed this, which he didn't. The innocent casualties must have been in the hundreds, but hey, he saved those 5 people, so all those deaths were worth it. The last thing I want to talk about before I give this movie my rating is, spoiler alert, John Malkovich's death scene has to be the most overkill death scene I've ever seen. First he gets a stick jammed through his leg, he's then handcuffed to a fire truck ladder and slams through 2 glass windows and is electrocuted by wires. But he's somehow still alive, only to be finished off by some sort of rock-crushing machine at a construction site. What? This film was a hell of a lot of fun to watch. Every person in this camps it up, and the film is better for it. I'm going to give it 7 out of 10 Steve Buscemi eyes. Next up was Raising Arizona. I'm a fan of many Coen Brothers films, so I was looking forward to this one. It also had a crossover with Con Air in the fact that Cage has a ridiculous southern accent. He starts out in prison, and there's another over-the-top death scene. Raising Arizona is about a repeatedly convicted convenience store robber played by Nicolas Cage and a former cop played by Holly Hunter. The two find out they're unable to have kids, and when a local businessman named Nathan Arizona has quintuplets, the couple decides to kidnap one of them as their own because 5 is way too many. Cage's former prison inmates escape prison, played by John Goodman and William Forsythe, and come to live with him. Once they discover who the baby is, though, and the $25,000 bounty for his safe return, the two bumbling criminals kidnap the baby and even take him on a robbery. Oh, and because this is a Coen Brothers film, Frances McDormand also makes a small appearance. You can see the early groundwork for future Coen Brother films in this, but it still seems they're trying to find their style of filmmaking that they would later be known for. It has some really funny and absurd parts that have me laughing my ass off. Holly Hunter is the standout in this film, though. She plays the role straight despite all the nonsense lines coming out of her mouth, and it's a great performance. And this was my favorite Nicolas Cage line from the film.
But the doctor explained that her insides were a rocky place where my seed could find no purchase.
In the end, I like Con Air a little bit more, so I'm going to have to give this 6.5 Frances McDormands out of 10. Next up is National Treasure. National Treasure was a fun Disney adventure film. Nicolas Cage plays a treasure hunter trying to find a treasure hidden by the forefathers of America. Funding his expedition is this guy, played by Sean Bean. Look at those beautifully flowing golden locks on Bean. They find out that the missing map is on the back of the Declaration of Independence, and Bean says they're gonna steal it, but Cage is against it. Sean Bean turns on Nicolas Cage. What a shock! Sean Bean is a bad guy in a movie? Who could have ever predicted this? Nicolas Cage decides to steal the Declaration of Independence before Sean Bean can, with the help of his sidekick, Doug from The Hangover. The first half of this film is essentially a heist film with all the classic heist tropes. The quick cutting cameras to the heist location while the plan is explained, changing the cameras to pre-recorded footage, and the old switcheroo. The second half is an adventure caper with Nicolas Cage, Doug from The Hangover, and Diane Kruger playing cat and mouse with Sean Bean and his crew. By the way, there's this guy in it, who seemingly works with Diane Kruger and he's super creepy with her, but there's no payoff to it. He's never brought up again. Some others I didn't mention is Jon Voight playing Cage's father, and Harvey Keitel plays what I think is the curator of the Declaration of Independence or something like that. Who knows, it's freaking Harvey Keitel. It was exciting just to see him. Cage finds out the real treasure is the friends and memories he made along the way. Well, not really, but you'll have to watch to find out. I didn't want to choose the obvious choice for my favorite Nicolas Cage line in this movie, but I had to. It's literally that good. So here it is.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
I enjoyed this film for what it was. It reminded me a lot of one of my favorite video game series, Uncharted. The only thing that I didn't enjoy was Justin Bartha's character. He was meant to be the comic relief sidekick, but all of his jokes just land flat. I don't know if it was just bad writing or Bartha wasn't delivering them correctly, or maybe a bit of both. Also, for you Dexter fans out there, Sergeant Dokes makes a quick cameo and almost recreates his memorable scene from the show.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Con Air still edges National Treasure out a bit, but I'm gonna still give it 7 out of 10 Sean Bean golden locks. Next up is Leaving Las Vegas. Leaving Las Vegas was a must-watch for this Cage-a-thon. It was Nicolas Cage's Oscar-winning performance, but it's really hard to watch. It makes you feel uncomfortable from the start and doesn't let up, getting worse and worse until the bitter end. Cage stars as an alcoholic who loses his wife and job. He decides to move to Las Vegas in order to drink himself to death. Elizabeth Shue plays a prostitute who falls for Cage, and the two struggle through life. There isn't much more plot to it than that. You watch Cage's character slowly decline while Shue's character is continually used and abused. It really was one of the hardest films I've had to sit through. I also didn't like the editing in this movie. It's choppy and cut all over the place. I'm not sure if this was intentionally done to put us inside the head of Cage's character, or it was an accident, but it was a dizzying experience. I've been picking my favorite Cageisms, if you will, for each of these films, but this one was hard to choose for obvious reasons. I decided to go with a more comedic scene, and I used comedic lightly here. This is my favorite Cage line from this film.
I wonder if you'll take $250 to fuck me.
I also wanted to mention that Julian Lennon, John Lennon's son, makes a cameo in this film as a bartender. I have no idea why, and it seems like this is his only major acting credit. Despite this being a miserable experience, I'm glad I've seen it, but it's one of those movies I don't ever want to watch again. I can appreciate the film for what it is. Cage and Shu put on incredible performances, and the subject matter isn't meant to be a pleasurable experience. Also, don't watch this right before bed like I did, or you'll have terrible dreams. To make myself feel better, I'm going to give this movie 6 out of 10 super cute fluffy puppies. Next up is The Rock. Now, despite what you may assume, this isn't a documentary on Dwayne Johnson. Michael Bay directed this film, so you know what that means. Let me see if I can explain the plot of The Rock, because it's a bit complicated. Ed Harris plays a general who has lost many men throughout his military career in Black Ops missions. These men were killed in action, never given military burial, and their families weren't compensated. So, what does Ed Harris do? He and some mercenaries, including Dr. Cox, Tuco, and the Candyman, take over Alcatraz prison and threaten a nerve gas attack on San Francisco if they don't receive $100 million in reparations for the families of the lost soldiers. Yes, the only way to honor those dead soldiers is by creating more dead soldiers. Who pays reparations to the families of the SEALs you killed, Ed Harris? Anyway, Nicolas Cage plays an FBI chemical nerd, and he has a reunion with his Raising Arizona co-star William Forsythe. However, no one knows how to get into Alcatraz undetected, so they call upon escape artist and the only man who has ever escaped Alcatraz, Sean Connery. To cooperate, the FBI agrees to give Sean Connery a stay at a luxury suite, or as Connery says, a suite. And then he gets a haircut and trim from the father in Yes Dear, who plays the stereotypical gay man, the 90s, am I right? Later in the film, we realize that Sean Connery was a British special ops spy, and because he knew too much, he was thrown in prison for 30 years without a trial. That's right, Sean Connery, British special ops spy. I'm not saying this is James Bond canon, but I'm also not saying it's not. There's one scene in this film that makes no sense. When breaking into Alcatraz, Sean Connery goes on his own to unlock a door, and the Navy SEALs think he escaped. They're breaking into Alcatraz, and the only way in is the way they came in, so where the hell could he have possibly gone? Also, he was missing for like 30 seconds, so just chill. Alright, so I lied, that's not the only thing that doesn't make sense in this film, but who's counting? There were so many incredible Cage lines in this film, but there was a clear favorite for me, and it was this one.
Do you like the Elton John song Rocket Man?
I don't like soft ass shit.
Oh, you know. Well, I only bring it up because, it's you. You're the Rocket Man.
This movie was really entertaining. Cage and Connery have a good on-screen chemistry, which I never would have expected. I'm starting to think Nicolas Cage the action star is my favorite version of Nicolas Cage. I'm giving The Rock a 7.5 out of 10 stars. Next up is Moonstruck. Moonstruck is a film that most people know best from this scene.
Snap out of it!
The film is the exact opposite of Leaving Las Vegas. It's a feel-good romantic comedy that has a warmth and charm to it. Everyone is great in it, including both Cher and Olympia Dukakis, who both won Academy Awards for their roles in this film. Moonstruck is about an Italian woman living in Brooklyn, New York, who falls in love with the brother of the man she's engaged to, played by Nicolas Cage. She also finds out that her father is having an affair, and her mother seeks comfort from Frasier's dad. Everything comes to a head at the end in a hilarious breakfast scene and ties up the film in a nice bow. It is one of those movies that take place at Christmas time but isn't a Christmas-centric film. Kind of like Die Hard or any Shane Black film. Also, it has music by Dick Hyman. With a name like that, how can you not watch it? One more time, Dick Hyman. My favorite Nicolas Cage line from this film is this one.
Now I want you to come upstairs with me and get in my bed.
I'm going to give Moonstruck a solid 7.5 out of 10 spicy meatballs. Next up is Vampire's Kiss. Wow. Just wow. This one's going to take some unpacking. When I heard about Nicolas Cage's eccentric acting, I believe they were talking about this film. I probably could have made an entire video on just this movie, but I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. The film is about Nicolas Cage's character spiraling out of control in what seems to be a manic nervous breakdown. After an encounter with a bat in his apartment, he believes he's turning into a vampire. We as the audience are informed early on that he is indeed not turning into a vampire, but instead just losing his mind. Then there's the B-plot of him tormenting his secretary Alma because she can't find the contract he's been asking for. I mean, he really tortures her around the office. When she calls in sick to get away from him, he shows up at her house. He basically lures her in with kindness and then just flips on the dime like he's bipolar. Vampire's Kiss makes some strange choices, and Cage makes some strange choices as well. His acting's way over the top. He starts at about an 11 and just goes up from there. The facial expressions he makes are insane. Also, what is with this weird accent he has?
Still wouldn't ask that person to partake in such a miserable job as long as you were around.
That's not an accent I've ever heard before, and he has this laugh that seemingly comes out of nowhere. I had many laughs throughout this film, and I don't think it was meant to be a comedy. I mean, when he runs around the park with his vampire teeth and steals a pigeon and puts it in his jacket, it's so odd that I couldn't help but bust out laughing, just imagining what it was like on set that day. Speaking of being on set, there's a scene where Cage eats a cockroach, and it was meant to be a fake one, but Cage was like, no, get me a real one. So he eats a real cockroach in this film. There were so many great lines to choose from for my favorite Cage line, but this was without a doubt the one that made me laugh the hardest.
Do you ask my things? Huh? That's all you have to do!
Very good. You know your alphabet.
I never misspelled anything!
Okay, now that I got Cage's performance out of the way, I want to talk quickly about the choices the director seemingly made. There is a scene in which Nicolas Cage chases his secretary into the women's bathroom and she warns him she has a gun. An old lady steps out of the bathroom and asks, "What the fuck is going on?" And then she leaves while looking right down the lens of the camera. How many people were on set that agreed that was the perfect take and to move on? And not one person was like, this woman's being attacked in the bathroom by a man and you just leave? Is this director an alien? He also puts a scene in where there are two mimes performing outside of Cage's apartment. Why? Who knows? They're also seemingly performing on a street with no one there. Shouldn't they be on a busy street? Are these his neighbors? I have so many questions. This movie is bad. However, this is the kind of bad movie that is entertaining. A film you can watch and laugh because of its absurdity. That's why I'm going to give it a passing rating, based solely on its ability to entertain. I can honestly admit I was not bored once throughout his entire viewing. If you want to see Nicolas Cage at his cagiest, then Vampire's Kiss is the one to watch. Still a better vampire movie than Twilight. I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 10 pocket pigeons. Next up is The Family Man. This felt like a film I should have watched at Christmas time, but oh well. This opens with Nicolas Cage leaving his girlfriend, played by Tia Leone, at the airport and saying he'll be back in a year, even though she asked him to stay. Fast forward many years, and Cage is now a big-time business guy on Wall Street. He goes into a convenience store that's being robbed by the only black character in the film, played by Don Cheadle. Come on, 2000, you're better than that. After Cage tells Cheadle he has everything he's ever wanted, Cheadle's like, oh yeah? And then just walks away. The next day, which is Christmas by the way, Cage wakes up in a different bed with his wife, Tia Leone, 2 kids, and a dog. Turns out Don Cheadle's some sort of magical black man, or maybe an angel. Cheadle explains to him that this is what your life would have been like had you not gotten on the plane so many years ago and stayed with Tia Leone. It basically turns into a whole It's a Wonderful Life situation, with a couple nods to it. Cheadle even gives him a bicycle bell to ring in order to call on him, which goes with the whole famous line every time a bell rings, you get it, so he must be an angel. This becomes a fish out of water film as Cage struggles to become a family man and dealing with having little money. But, you know, some things are more important than money. At least that's the moral this film's trying to get across. I really like the dynamic between Cage and his daughter. She thinks he's an alien who replaced her real dad, so she helps him out with caring for her little brother, and sort of giving him information on his wife. I wish there were more scenes with the two of them. My favorite Cage line from this film was this.
We'll get a funnel cake. It'll be the highlight of my week.
This movie was really sweet and ended up being my favorite Cage film so far. I caught myself involuntarily smiling at the TV during some of the scenes, and genuinely feeling bad for Cage's character at the end. I'll admit, I got a bit emotional, alright? I won't spoil the end, I just wish they had done it a bit differently. With that being said, I'm going to give this movie 8 out of 10 James Stewarts. Next up is Adaptation. And I thought explaining the plot to The Rock was going to be hard. Hopefully I can do this justice. Adaptation is a film about screenwriter Charlie Kaufman, who is the screenwriter of this film trying to adapt the book Orchid Thief into the film we're currently watching. Pretty meta, right? If you think one Nicolas Cage isn't enough, well this one has 2 because he plays Charlie's twin brother as well. Try and keep up because this is kind of like writing Inception. Kaufman struggles to adapt this book and struggles with women. I mean, he's really awkward. He also masturbates a lot, it seems. The book he's adapting is kind of unadaptable because it's about flowers, and he slowly writes himself into the screenplay and creates an entire story about the author, played by Meryl Streep, and an illegal dealer of rare, nearly extinct orchids, played by Chris Cooper, who won an Oscar for this role. He's the subject matter for the book she wrote that is being turned into this film. I'm telling you, it's hard to keep up. My favorite Cage line from Adaptation was this one.
A little push in the bush.
I appreciate the uniqueness of this film and the intricate details that went into the actual screenplay. I always want to applaud something different on film. However, the story's so much to take in that you probably should watch it more than once. It gets convoluted and confusing. I do feel, though, that this could be a film that'll grow on me over time. Ask me about Adaptation again in a few years. For now, though, I'm going to give Adaptation a 6 out of 10 receding hairlines. Next up is Lord of War. Lord of War was something I had high hopes for, but unfortunately it didn't live up to my expectation. Nicolas Cage plays Yuri Orlov, an illegal arms dealer, and his rise and kind of fall? I won't go too much more into the plot as it's well worth a watch, but I don't know, something just felt missing. It was underwhelming. There are no likable characters in this film except maybe his wife, and she's very one-dimensional. Ethan Hawke plays the agent tracking Cage down, and he even comes off as whiny and annoying. So who do I root for? The music was also a bit on the nose with no nuance. I mean, Hallelujah is such an overused song in films, and how can you sit there and play Cocaine by Eric Clapton while Jared Leto does a bunch of cocaine? That's just lazy. The other unfortunate thing about Lord of War is everything is predictable. Every scene you could tell where it was headed and there was no surprises. It felt like the writer had just taken a screenwriting 101 class. Despite all these flaws, it's an interesting look into gun running which I had no prior knowledge about. I didn't know how it worked or how someone could get into that kind of operation. Plus, Nicolas Cage does put on a good performance while Jared Leto does as well as Cage's brother. This was before Leto won his Oscar and began liking the smell of his own farts and overacting in every role he played in since then. Oh, you sent dead rats to your co-stars while shooting Suicide Squad? You're so edgy. Sorry, I have to book another Jared Leto appointment with my therapist. Lord of War was another film that didn't have a lot of crazy lines coming from Cage. I absolutely loved his uncle telling someone to go have intercourse with themselves. But as for Cage lines, this was a pretty good one too.
I never sold to Osama bin Laden. Not on any moral grounds. Back then, he was always bouncing checks.
This one took some time to think about, but I think I'm going to give Lord of War a 6 out of 10 Muricas. Next up is Peggy Sue Got Married. This movie was a family affair, with Nicolas Cage's uncle Francis Ford Coppola directing and Coppola's daughter and now acclaimed director Sofia Coppola playing Kathleen Turner's younger sister. The film stars, as I mentioned already, Kathleen Turner in the titular role as a woman who attends her high school reunion, who is apparently idolized by her high school because it seems like all the blown up photos at the reunion are just of her. She is named Reunion Queen, but when she goes on stage to accept her crown, she passes out and is transported back to the 50s and her high school years. I'm a bit of a sucker for time travel films, and this one had a certain charm to it. The beginning has a bit of over-the-top acting, and I had trouble differentiating Kathleen Turner from Catherine Hicks for a while. But it was a cute film that lets you look back at life with some retrospect and realize the important things in life. This is also another Cage film that you can add to the list of crazy accents. He plays Turner's soon-to-be ex-husband and high school sweetheart and has an almost cartoon-like voice.
I also want to suck your Twinkie.
By the way, Jim Carrey's in this film, and I had no idea he was even in it or that he'd worked with Cage before. I know Carrey asked Cage to be in Dumb and Dumber with him, only to turn it down to do Leaving Las Vegas, which I think worked out for both of them. My favorite Cage line was this one.
You mean my wang?
Peggy Sue Got Married is a fun watch with a Grease vibe to it, just without the singing. Well, Nicolas Cage actually does sing in it, so scratch that. I'm going to give Peggy Sue Got Married a 7 out of 10 Sandys! And, speaking of Grease, the final film I watched was Face Off. Okay, I lied. I have seen Face Off before. However, I was just a kid and I barely remember any of it. I do know I enjoyed it as a kid, so I'm hoping that I hadn't remembered it differently. Face Off is another 90s action film that falls into the category of ridiculous plots. Let me take you through it the best I can without spoiling. The film starts with Cage's character Castor Troy attempting an assassination on FBI agent Sean Archer, played by John Travolta. However, the bullet goes straight through Travolta and kills his son. You know you're in for something great when a film starts with child murder. Fast forward 6 years later and we get to see Cage dancing around as a priest after planting a bomb, and damn does he have some good moves. There's a big shootout and Travolta seemingly kills Cage. Boom, end of film. Oh, there's more? Oh, that's right, the bomb. Travolta needs to find out where the bomb is and is failing to get the information out of Cage's brother. So what's the next logical conclusion on how to get this information? You take Nicolas Cage's face and put it on Travolta's face and then his brother will talk. I'm not kidding. This really is one of the first ideas they come up with. And then Travolta's like, no, I don't want to. But okay. The funny thing is, when they're removing Travolta's face, they're also cutting his hair to look like Cage's, which I feel is something they could have done after surgery. At this point, I feel like I should use their characters' names from now on, or it may get a bit confusing. So Sean Archer, dressed as Castor Troy, enters prison and finds out pretty quickly the bomb is at the LA Convention Center. Meanwhile, back at the lab, Castor Troy wakes up and he holds the doctor hostage and makes him put Sean Archer's face on his. That's right, Castor Troy will now look like Sean Archer. It's like a creepy Freaky Friday situation we have here. Once Sean Archer gets the information as Castor Troy, he finds out he has a visitor. Uh-oh, it's himself. Well, it's Castor Troy as Sean Archer. Are you keeping up with this? We get Travolta acting over the top like Nicolas Cage, and I'm not gonna lie, I loved every second of it. The rest of the film is Castor Troy messing up Sean Archer's life and sleeping with his wife, because I guess the surgery included matching penis surgery. And then Sean Archer has to live Castor Troy's life in an attempt to get his old life back. And then they face off. I'll stop right there because you should really watch this film. Here are a few notes I made while watching this. It felt as though Castor Troy was being a better husband and father to Sean Archer's family than Sean Archer was, which is kind of unsettling. The stunt people are quite obvious throughout this film. They didn't do a great job of hiding them. There's a scene in which Castor Troy gets on a plane and says something along the lines of, "If I let you suck my tongue, would you be grateful?" to an airplane stewardess, and she sits on his lap and starts making out with him. Then you find out she's actually an undercover FBI agent. She must be really dedicated to her job. Also, Sean Archer keeps doing this weird thing where he rubs his hand down his family's face. It just doesn't sit well with me. Please don't do that ever again. Then there's a scene that hasn't aged well in which a guy essentially tries to rape Sean Archer's daughter in his car, only to get his ass kicked by Castor Troy. That actor was Danny Masterson, and if you do a quick Google search of what Danny Masterson's life is like right now, you'll understand why this scene doesn't age well. I wasn't sure how to choose my favorite Cage line from this film. Do I pick something that Nicolas Cage actually said, or do I pick a Travolta line as Nicolas Cage? Instead, I decided to play it safe and go with a line from actual Nicolas Cage.
You know, I can eat a peach for hours.
This movie was incredible. Watching John Travolta mimic Nicolas Cage's acting was a lot of fun to watch. Don't get me wrong, this film is full of flaws and plot holes, but I love it for the imperfect movie it is, and it's suitable that I ended with this film as I believe this was peak 90s action. I'm going to give this film 8 out of 10 hand wipes. Well, that's it. I made it through all 12 films, and I won't lie, I was starting to get a bit of Nicolas Cage fatigue near the end. I thought it was telling that I didn't give any of the 12 films a failing grade. So is Nicolas Cage a good actor? I think the answer is an astounding yes. Nicolas Cage is not your conventional actor, but he's always entertaining, and isn't that the point of films? I think there are two different Nicolas Cages. You can sometimes tell when Cage is in a film he deeply cares about, and other times you can tell when he's just there for the paycheck. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sure, I'm not going to sit down and watch a Nicolas Cage straight-to-DVD film, but when he truly cares about a script, it shows. I wouldn't mind seeing Nicolas Cage enter the MCU, redeeming himself from his Ghost Rider role by playing some over-the-top villain. After sitting through this entire marathon and doing the research on Nicolas Cage, I'm officially a fan of Nicolas Cage the actor and the man, not Nicolas Cage the internet meme, and I can't wait to see what he does next. So to answer my initial question, yes, Nicolas Cage is a good actor. If you like this video and want me to do more like it, like, comment, and subscribe. Bye everyone.